All right, so are you ready to take a deep dive today?
Always.
Okay, good, because we're going to need our scuba gear for this one.
Oh,
Yeah, today we're diving deep into the world of Bitcoin and global economics.
sounds good.
Yeah, we've got this fascinating analysis, and it's titled, Is the Medium and Long-Term Trend of Bitcoin Still Bullish?
Hmm.
It poses a question that really grabbed my attention.
Okay, what's that?
Is Bitcoin like becoming the ultimate safe haven in a world riddled with economic uncertainty?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, and I'm joined by our expert who's ready to unpack this potentially explosive idea.
All right, let's do it.
So what do you think? Is this just hype, or are we witnessing like a fundamental shift in how people view money?
Hmm. That is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, and what I think is so fascinating about this analysis is how it connects the dots between things that seem like they're totally unrelated,
Okay.
like President Trump's economic policies and China's currency strategies.
Hmm.
And it argues that these could actually be driving a Bitcoin bull market.
Okay, that's a bold claim.
It is.
I'm all ears, lay it on me. How could Trump's policies possibly impact Bitcoin?
All right, well, the analysis suggests that one of Trump's primary goals is to weaken the U.S. dollar.
Really?
Yeah, and now this might seem kind of counterintuitive,
Okay.
but a weaker dollar can actually make it easier for the U.S. to manage its massive debt.
Okay.
It also makes American goods cheaper on the global market, which could boost exports.
Interesting. So a weaker dollar could be good for the U.S. economy in some ways.
Right.
But wait, I'm not seeing the connection to Bitcoin yet.
Okay, sure. So the connection lies in how investors react to a weakening dollar.
Hmm.
Historically, when traditional currencies lose value, investors tend to look for alternative assets to protect their wealth from inflation.
Okay.
And that's where Bitcoin comes in.
Hmm.
Its decentralized nature, limited supply, and its position outside the traditional financial system make it a potentially attractive hedge against economic uncertainty.
So it's like a digital gold rush.
Yeah, you could say that.
People are flocking to Bitcoin as like a safe haven when the dollar feels shaky.
That's one way to look at it, yeah.
Okay.
The analysis uses these terms weak hands and strong hands to describe different types of Bitcoin investors.
Okay.
So weak hands are those who sell their Bitcoin during periods of uncertainty or market dips,
Hmm.
driven by fear and short-term thinking.
I see.
Think of them like those who panic and sell their stocks at the first sign of a market downturn.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
So then who are the strong hands?
Okay, so strong hands are those who are accumulating Bitcoin, holding on to it despite market fluctuations.
Okay.
They believe in its long-term potential, and they're not easily swayed by short-term price swings.
Gotcha.
They're more like those who held on to Apple or Amazon stock through thick and thin, convinced of the company's long-term vision.
Ah, I see. So while the weak hands are getting spooked by a weakening dollar and selling the strong hands are seeing it as an opportunity to buy more Bitcoin at a potentially discounted price.
Precisely. They're betting that as the dollar weakens and traditional markets become more volatile, Bitcoin's appeal as a safe haven asset will only grow stronger.
Okay.
And they're willing to ride out the short-term ups and downs to potentially reap the long-term rewards.
So it's like those early investors in those early tech companies who saw the potential before everyone else.
Right.
Are we seeing a similar dynamic play out with Bitcoin right now?
Yeah, it's definitely a parallel worth considering.
Yeah.
And the analysis suggests that this strong end accumulation could be one of the factors driving the current bullish trend in Bitcoin.
Okay, so we've got Trump potentially weakening the dollar,
Right.
investors seeking refuge from inflation,
Yeah.
and strong hands betting big on Bitcoin. It's a pretty compelling narrative so far.
It is.
But the analysis also mentions China's role in all of this.
It does.
So how does China fit into this global economic chess game?
Well, the analysis argues that China has been deliberately devaluing its currency, the yuan, as part of its strategic mercantilism policy. Now, mercantilism is essentially a way for a country to try and gain an economic advantage over others.
Oh,
So by making its exports cheaper and its imports more expensive, a country can boost its own economy at the expense of its trading partners.
so by manipulating its currency, China is making its goods cheaper on the global market, which then makes American goods more expensive in comparison.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And this is where the potential for economic tension comes in.
Mm.
The analysis suggests that Trump sees this as an unfair advantage and is likely pushing for a correction to this economic imbalance.
Okay.
However, It also points out that there's potential for a multilateral agreement between China, the EU, and the US,
Hmm.
a sort of economic truce to stabilize the global landscape.
But wouldn't a global economic agreement also stabilize traditional markets?
Potentially, yeah.
Potentially lessening the need for a safe haven asset like Bitcoin.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it brings up a crucial point. The future of Bitcoin is intricately linked to the overall health of the global economy.
Yeah.
If things settle down and traditional markets regain their footing, the appeal of Bitcoin as a safe haven might diminish.
Okay.
But if uncertainty and volatility persist, Bitcoin could continue to shine as a viable alternative.
So it's all about how much faith people have in the traditional financial system, right?
That's a key takeaway, yeah.
If that faith erodes, Bitcoin stands to benefit.
It seems so.
And what's particularly interesting is that the analysis claims the markets are already anticipating this potential economic truce.
Really?
Yeah, and it notes that earlier predictions of a strong dollar and rising interest rates haven't materialized. So we're seeing the opposite, a weakening dollar and falling interest rates.
We are.
Isn't that good news for Bitcoin?
It could be. And it raises an important question. If these trends continue, how will they impact Bitcoin's price in the long run?
Okay, now I'm really starting to see how all these pieces fit together.
Yeah.
Trump's policies, China's currency moves the potential for a global agreement, and this idea of strong hands accumulating Bitcoin.
Still a lot to unpack.
Yeah, it's quite the complex web.
It is.
But before we get too deep into predicting the future, I think we should unpack some of the specific details of the analysis a bit more. What do you think?
I agree. Let's dive into some of the finer points and see what other insights we can uncover.
Great. Now, the analysis mentions that Bitcoin is currently experiencing a consolidation phase.
It does.
Can you explain what that means for those of us who aren't expert traders?
Sure. A consolidation phase is essentially a period of sideways movement in the market where prices are trading within a relatively narrow range.
Okay.
It's like Bitcoin is taking a breather after a big run-up gathering momentum before its next move.
So not a market top, but a pause before the next big move.
Yeah, that's the idea.
That's good news for those strong hands who are buying up Bitcoin at these levels, right?
That's the idea the analysis is putting forward.
Okay.
It's saying this sideways action isn't a sign of weakness. It's more like Bitcoin catching its breath before the next leg up. And the analysis even highlights a specific price range, roughly $90,000 to $109,000, where this consolidation is taking place.
So for those strong hands, this consolidation phase is like a discount sale on Bitcoin.
You could see it.
They're getting in at a potentially favorable price before the market potentially takes off again.
That's one way to interpret it.
Wow, this is all pretty mind-blowing.
It is.
It makes you realize how interconnected everything is in the global economy.
Absolutely. And it highlights how events that might seem unrelated to Bitcoin, like U.S. economic policy or China's currency strategies, can actually have a profound impact on its value.
So what does this all mean for someone who's just starting to learn about Bitcoin?
It emphasizes that Bitcoin is not just a digital currency. It's a complex asset that's deeply intertwined with global economic forces.
Right, and it means that understanding Bitcoin's future requires looking beyond just price charts and technical analysis.
Precisely. It means considering the broader economic context, geopolitical events, and even investor psychology.
So it's not just about knowing how to buy and sell Bitcoin, it's about understanding the forces that are shaping its role in the world.
Exactly. And this is where things get really exciting.
Ah.
Because as the global economic landscape continues to shift, Bitcoin's role is likely to evolve as well.
And who knows what new possibilities or challenges that might bring.
That's the beauty of it. We're witnessing the emergence of a new financial system in real time, and it's impossible to predict exactly where it will lead.
I love that the future is unwritten and Bitcoin is right there on the front lines.
It is.
But before we completely lose ourselves in the vast possibilities of the future, I think it's important to circle back to you, our listener,
Right.
and make sure we've equipped you with some practical takeaways from this deep dive. What
Yeah.
do you think?
Agreed. What are some key things you think our listeners should keep in mind?
First and foremost, I think it's crucial to understand that Bitcoin is not operating in a vacuum. Its value is influenced by a complex web of global factors, many of which are outside the control of any single government or institution.
Excellent point. It's easy to get caught up in the hype or fear surrounding Bitcoin, but it's essential to take a step back and consider the bigger picture.
And building on that, I think it's crucial to approach Bitcoin with a long-term perspective.
I couldn't agree more. Short-term price fluctuations are inevitable, but it's the long-term trends that truly matter.
Right. And this means doing your own research, understanding the risks involved, and not investing more than you could afford to lose.
Wise words, Bitcoin can be a volatile asset, and it's not for the faint of heart.
But for those who are willing to learn and adapt, it offers a fascinating glimpse into the future of finance.
And perhaps even a way to participate in shaping that future.
Exactly. Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave you, our listener, with one final thought-provoking question.
Okay, shoot.
If this analysis is correct, and Bitcoin is indeed emerging as a hedge against traditional economic forces, what other global events might impact its value in the future? That's a great question to ponder.
It is. We'll dig into that more in part 2.
It opens up a whole new realm of possibilities and challenges.
It certainly does. And it's a reminder that the world of Bitcoin is constantly evolving, and there's always more to learn and explore.
There is.
But for now, we'll leave you with that to ponder.
Well said.
Yeah.
We'll pick up the conversation in part 2 of this deep dive. Until then, happy exploring.
Sounds good.
Welcome back.
So I'm eager to explore that final thought-provoking question we left you with.
Okay.
What other global events,
Right.
besides U.S. economic policy or China's currency moves,
Yeah.
could impact Bitcoin's value?
It's a big question, and I think it helps to remember what makes Bitcoin attractive in the first place.
Okay.
It's decentralized,
Yeah.
meaning no single government or institution controls it.
Right.
That makes it potentially resistant to things that shake people's faith in traditional systems.
Okay, so if we think about events that cause that kind of shake-up, what comes to mind?
Geopolitical instability is a big one.
Wars, major conflicts, sanctions. These things can disrupt economies
Right.
and make people question the stability of traditional currencies and financial institutions.
I see where you're going with this.
Yeah.
If you're living in a country experiencing major conflict or political upheaval, suddenly a decentralized asset like Bitcoin starts to look pretty appealing, right?
Exactly. It's a way to potentially preserve your wealth when the systems you're used to are in turmoil.
Right.
We've even seen examples of this in recent years where citizens in countries experiencing hyperinflation or strict capital controls have turned to Bitcoin as a lifeline.
That's a powerful point. It's not just theoretical, it's playing out in the real world right now.
It is. And it's not just about major conflicts either.
Okay.
Think about things like sudden currency devaluations, government crackdowns on certain financial activities, or even political uncertainty in major economies.
Okay.
Any event that erodes trust in traditional systems could potentially benefit Bitcoin.
So the takeaway here is that the world of Bitcoin is inextricably linked to the wider world.
Right. To understand Bitcoin's future, you have to understand the forces that are shaping our world.
Well said. And that makes it a fascinating space to watch.
It does.
You can almost use Bitcoin as a barometer for global trust.
Okay.
The more uncertainty there is, the more attractive Bitcoin might become.
That's a brilliant way to put it. It almost turns the whole safe haven narrative on its head.
Yeah.
Bitcoin isn't just a safe haven from economic storms, it's a reflection of those storms, a gauge of how much faith people have in traditional systems.
Precisely. And that makes predicting its future incredibly complex, but also incredibly exciting.
I agree. Now, before we get too carried away, let's loop back to something you mentioned earlier, the strong hands and weak hands in the Bitcoin market.
Sure.
I think it's worth unpacking that concept a bit more for our listener.
Yeah, you're right. It's crucial to understanding the dynamics at play. Think of it this way. Imagine a ship sailing through rough seas.
Okay.
The weak hands are those who get seasick at the first sign of choppy waters.
Oh.
They panic, sell their shares, and jump ship at the first sign of trouble.
So they're driven by emotion, fear, and short-term thinking.
Exactly. They might even sell at a loss just to escape the perceived danger.
Wow.
But then you have the strong hands.
Okay.
They've weathered storms before. They trust the ship. They believe in the journey, and they're prepared to ride out the turbulence.
So they're the seasoned sailors, the experienced investors who see the bigger picture and understand that short-term volatility is part of the game.
Precisely. They're not easily swayed by market dips or negative headlines. In fact, they often see those dips as opportunities to buy more at a lower price, knowing that the ship will eventually right itself and continue its course.
Now, if we apply that analogy to Bitcoin, it seems like the analysis is suggesting that the strong hands are currently in control.
It does seem that way.
They're accumulating Bitcoin even as the weak hands are getting spooked by things like a weakening dollar or geopolitical uncertainty.
That seems to be the case. And the analysis argues that this strong hand accumulation could be one of the key factors driving the current bullish trend in Bitcoin.
It makes sense. If those with a long-term vision and deep pockets are buying up Bitcoin,
Yeah.
that sends a powerful signal to the market, right?
It does. It suggests that those who truly understand Bitcoin and its potential see a bright future ahead despite the current economic uncertainties.
Now, I know we're not in the business of giving financial advice, but I can't help but wonder if our listener is intrigued by all this talk of Bitcoin as a potential safe haven and strong hands driving the market.
Right.
What are some things they should consider if they're thinking about dipping their toes into the Bitcoin waters?
That's a great question. First and foremost, it's crucial to emphasize that Bitcoin is not a get-rich-quick scheme.
Okay.
It's a volatile asset, and there's always the risk of losing money.
So don't bet the farm on Bitcoin, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Start small, do your own research, understand the risks involved, and never invest more than you can afford to lose.
And it's not just about understanding the risks, it's also about understanding your own financial goals.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
Are you looking for a short-term profit, or are you thinking long-term?
Right.
Your investment strategy should align with your goals.
If you're just chasing quick gains, you might be tempted to sell at the first sign of a market dip, becoming one of those weak hands we talked about.
Yeah.
But if you believe in the long-term potential of Bitcoin, you're more likely to ride out the waves and potentially reap the rewards down the line.
Exactly. And this brings us back to the importance of doing your own research.
Yeah.
Don't just rely on what you hear from us or any single source.
Right.
Dig deeper, read different perspectives, and form your own informed opinion.
Excellent advice. Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave our listener with one final thought-provoking question.
I'm intrigued. What have you got?
If Bitcoin is becoming a reflection of global trust, or perhaps the lack thereof, what does that say about the future of traditional financial systems? Are we witnessing a gradual shift in power, a slow but steady decentralization of finance?
Ooh.
It's a big question and one that we'll explore further in part 3.
That's a fantastic question to ponder, and it really highlights the potential implications of this whole Bitcoin as a safe haven narrative.
Right.
We're not just talking about the price of Bitcoin here. We're talking about a potential paradigm shift in how we think about money and finance.
It's a powerful thought, isn't it?
It is.
That something born in the digital world could potentially disrupt centuries-old financial systems. But for now, we'll leave our listener to ponder those big questions.
Okay.
We'll dive back into the deep end in part 3 of our exploration.
Until then, happy exploring.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive.
It's been quite a journey.
It has, and I'm still kind of buzzing from that question we left you with.
Oh, yeah.
Could Bitcoin's rise actually signal a shift in power away from those traditional financial systems?
Yeah.
What do you think?
It's a question that's sparking a lot of debate, that's for sure. And I think it's important to remember that we're still in the early stages of this whole Bitcoin experiment.
Okay.
It's like we're watching the first automobiles roll off the assembly line. Exciting, full of potential, but still a long way from replacing horse-drawn carriages as like the dominant mode of transportation.
That's a great analogy.
Thanks.
So you're saying we shouldn't expect Bitcoin to like topple central banks and traditional currencies overnight?
Exactly. These systems are deeply entrenched with centuries of history and complex networks of power behind them. But that doesn't mean they're immune to change.
Right.
Technology has a way of disrupting the status quo,
It does.
and Bitcoin, with its decentralized nature and potential to empower individuals, represents a fundamental challenge to the way we think about money and finance.
So maybe it's not about an all-out revolution, but rather a gradual evolution?
Could be.
A slow but steady shift in power towards more decentralized systems?
That's a possibility worth exploring. And it's interesting to note that even central banks and governments are starting to take notice. Really?
Yeah, we're seeing the emergence of central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs.
Yeah.
In various countries, a clear indication that the traditional financial world is feeling the pressure to adapt and innovate.
So in a way, Bitcoin is forcing the old guard to rethink their approach,
It seems so.
to consider new possibilities.
It's certainly acting as a catalyst for change.
Yeah.
And this competition between old and new, centralized and decentralized, is likely to shape the financial landscape for years to come.
That's a fascinating point. It's not just about Bitcoin succeeding or failing.
Right.
It's about the broader impact it's having on the financial ecosystem.
Yeah, and this brings us back to that idea of Bitcoin as a barometer for global trust.
Okay.
If people are increasingly losing faith in traditional systems, are they looking to Bitcoin as a potential alternative?
That's the key question. And the analysis we've been discussing certainly suggests that there's a growing segment of investors who see Bitcoin as a hedge against economic uncertainty.
Yeah. A way to protect their wealth from inflation and a potential store of value in a world that feels increasingly unstable.
It does feel that way.
It's like that old saying,
What's that?
don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Right.
If you're worried about the stability of the basket holding your traditional assets, it makes sense to explore other options.
That's right. And for some, Bitcoin represents that alternative basket.
Okay.
It's a way to diversify their holdings, to potentially reduce their exposure to risk, and to participate in a system that operates outside the control of any single entity.
Now, I know we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from Trump's economic policies to China's currency moves
It's been a lot.
to the psychology of strong hands and weak hands. But if there's one key takeaway you hope our listener walks away with, what would it be?
I think the most important thing is to recognize that Bitcoin is not just a digital currency. It's a phenomenon that's forcing us to rethink our relationship with money, power, and control. It's a challenge to the status quo, a glimpse into a potential future where finance is more decentralized, transparent, and accessible.
I love that it's not just about investing, it's about reimagining the possibilities.
Exactly.
And it all comes back to that fundamental question.
Which is,
Do you trust the systems that currently control your money?
it's a good one.
If not, Bitcoin might just be worth exploring.
It's a question everyone needs to answer for themselves.
Wow.
And I think
Yep.
that's what makes this such an exciting time to be alive. We're witnessing a financial revolution in real time, and it's up to each of us to decide how we want to participate.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've given our listener plenty to chew on.
We have.
A huge thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Bitcoin and global economics. It's been a fascinating journey.
It has.
We'll see you next time.
Until then, happy exploring.